For most people today, the United States and Iran appear to be natural enemies, but the truth is far more surprising. Just a few decades ago, the two countries were actually close allies. In the 1960s and 1970s, Iran was ruled by a powerful monarch known as Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who maintained strong political and military ties with Washington. The United States saw Iran as a crucial partner in the Middle East, especially during the Cold War, when global influence between Western nations and the Soviet Union was fiercely contested. Iran's strategic location and massive oil reserves made it one of the most important allies America had in the region. American companies invested heavily in Iran's economy, and U.S. military advisors worked closely with Iranian forces. To many outside observers, the relationship seemed stable and mutually beneficial. Yet beneath the surface, tensions were quietly building. Many Iranians believed the Shah's government was too closely aligned with Western powers and did not represent the interests of ordinary citizens. Economic inequality, political repression, and accusations of foreign interference began fueling anger across the country. What looked like a stable alliance on the world stage was, in reality, a society approaching a historic breaking point. Everything changed in 1979, when one of the most dramatic political revolutions of the 20th century swept across Iran. Millions of protesters flooded the streets, demanding the end of the monarchy and the removal of the Shah from power. The demonstrations were driven by a mixture of economic frustration, religious movements, and widespread resentment toward foreign influence in Iranian politics. At the center of this revolution was a powerful religious figure named Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who had spent years in exile criticizing the Shah's rule. When the Shah fled the country in early 1979, Khomeini returned to Iran and quickly became the leader of a new political system known as the Islamic Republic. The revolution transformed Iran's government, society, and foreign policy almost overnight. The new leadership strongly opposed Western influence and viewed the United States as a symbol of decades of foreign interference in Iran's internal affairs. The overthrow of the Shah marked the moment when the friendly relationship between Washington and Tehran collapsed completely. What had once been a strategic alliance suddenly became one of the most hostile rivalries in modern geopolitics. Later that same year, tensions between the United States and the new Iranian government exploded into an international crisis that shocked the world. On November 4, 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and seized dozens of American diplomats and staff members. In total, 66 Americans were taken hostage, and 52 of them were held for an astonishing 444 days. The hostage-takers demanded that the United States return the former Shah of Iran, who had been allowed into America for medical treatment. The crisis dominated global headlines for more than a year and became one of the most humiliating diplomatic crises in modern American history. Television audiences around the world watched images of blindfolded hostages and angry crowds gathered outside the embassy walls. The standoff dramatically intensified hostility between the two nations and permanently shattered diplomatic relations. Even after the hostages were eventually released in 1981, the deep mistrust created by the crisis continued to shape U.S.-Iran relations for decades to come. Following the hostage crisis, the United States responded with severe economic sanctions against Iran and froze billions of dollars in Iranian assets. Diplomatic relations between the two nations were effectively cut off, and Iran quickly became one of Washington's primary geopolitical rivals in the Middle East. Over the following decades, tensions intensified as both countries accused each other of destabilizing the region. The United States claimed Iran was supporting militant groups and pursuing nuclear weapons technology, while Iranian leaders argued that Washington was attempting to control Middle Eastern politics and undermine Iran's sovereignty. Economic sanctions repeatedly targeted Iran's banking system, oil exports, and international trade networks, placing enormous pressure on the country's economy. Meanwhile, Iran continued expanding its missile capabilities and strengthening alliances with groups across the region. Each new dispute deepened the hostility between the two nations and made diplomatic reconciliation increasingly difficult. By the early 21st century, the relationship had evolved from political disagreement into a long-term geopolitical rivalry. By the beginning of the modern era, the rivalry between the United States and Iran had evolved into something far more complex than a simple diplomatic dispute. It had become a global geopolitical struggle involving alliances, regional power balances, and competing visions for the future of the Middle East. Iran strengthened relationships with groups and governments that opposed Western influence, while the United States deepened its partnerships with countries such as Israel and Saudi Arabia. Military forces from both sides increasingly operated in the same regions, particularly in Iraq, Syria, and the waters of the Persian Gulf. Each new confrontation added another layer of tension to an already fragile relationship. For decades, both countries avoided direct war, instead competing through economic pressure, proxy conflicts, and military deterrence. But as the years passed, the possibility of open confrontation continued to grow. The historical events that began in 1979 had created a rivalry powerful enough to shape global politics for generations. And now, more than 40 years later, that rivalry is once again pushing the world toward a danger. For a brief moment in modern history, it seemed possible that the decades-long hostility between the United States and Iran might finally be easing. In 2015, world powers reached a landmark diplomatic agreement known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, often referred to as the Iran nuclear deal. The agreement placed strict limits on Iran's nuclear program and allowed international inspectors to monitor its nuclear facilities. In exchange, economic sanctions that had crippled Iran's economy were gradually lifted, allowing the country to reconnect with global markets. Many international leaders believed the deal represented a turning point that could reduce tensions across the Middle East. However, the agreement quickly became one of the most controversial foreign policy issues in American politics. Critics argued that the deal did not go far enough to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons in the future. Supporters, on the other hand, believed it was the best available path to preventing a nuclear crisis through diplomacy. For a few years, the agreement held together, offering a fragile but hopeful pause in one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical rivalries. That fragile diplomatic breakthrough began to unravel in 2018 when the United States withdrew from the nuclear agreement and reimposed sweeping economic sanctions on Iran. The new sanctions targeted Iran's oil exports, financial institutions, and international trade networks, dramatically restricting the country's ability to sell its most valuable resource, energy. Almost immediately, Iran's economy entered a period of severe strain, with rising inflation, declining currency value, and widespread economic hardship affecting millions of citizens. At the same time, tensions in the Persian Gulf began escalating rapidly. Several mysterious attacks targeted oil tankers traveling through the region, raising fears of disruptions to global energy supplies. Washington accused Tehran of orchestrating the attacks, while Iranian officials denied responsibility and blamed foreign provocations. As accusations intensified, military forces from both countries increased their presence in the region. American aircraft carriers and warships patrolled the Persian Gulf, while Iran conducted missile tests and military exercises designed to demonstrate its growing defensive capabilities. The fragile balance between deterrence and diplomacy was quickly deteriorating. The confrontation reached a dramatic turning point in January 2020 with the killing of one of Iran's most powerful military figures, Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani was the commander of Iran's elite Quds force and was widely regarded as the architect of Iran's regional military strategy. For years, he had played a key role in building alliances with armed groups across the Middle East and coordinating military operations in countries such as Iraq and Syria. On January 3, 2020, a United States drone strike near Baghdad International Airport targeted a convoy carrying Soleimani, killing him instantly. The strike shocked the world and marked one of the most aggressive actions taken by the United States against Iran in decades. Iranian leaders condemned the attack as an act of war, while millions of mourners filled the streets of Tehran and other cities during massive funeral processions. The assassination pushed the already fragile relationship between the two countries to one of its most dangerous points since the Iran responded just days later with a dramatic display of military force. In a carefully coordinated operation, Iranian forces launched a series of ballistic missiles targeting American military bases in Iraq. One of the primary targets was the Ain al-Assad air base, where U.S. troops were stationed. The missile barrage caused significant structural damage to the base and injured several American service members, though no immediate fatalities were reported. For a moment, the world watched nervously as tensions appeared to be spiraling toward full-scale war. Governments across Europe and Asia urged restraint, fearing that further escalation could ignite a much larger regional conflict. Yet despite the intensity of the confrontation, both sides stopped short of launching additional large-scale attacks. Instead, the conflict settled into a tense standoff, marked by military posturing, economic pressure, and indirect confrontations across the Middle East. The missile strikes demonstrated just how quickly the rivalry between the United States and Iran could escalate into open military confrontation. By the early 2020s, it had become increasingly clear that the confrontation between the United States and Iran was no longer confined to diplomatic disputes or isolated incidents. Instead, it had evolved into a sprawling geopolitical struggle, unfolding across multiple countries and regions. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the waters of the Persian Gulf became key arenas where the influence of both powers collided. Armed groups aligned with Iran expanded their presence across the region, while the United States strengthened military partnerships with several Middle Eastern allies. Strategic waterways such as the Strait of Hormuz gained even greater importance as both sides recognized the enormous economic consequences of any disruption to global energy shipments. Each confrontation, each military exercise, and each political decision added another layer of tension to an already fragile situation. The rivalry that had begun with revolution and hostage crises decades earlier was now evolving into a dangerous regional standoff, one that could shape the future of the Middle East for years to come. Today, the confrontation between the United States and Iran has evolved into a conflict unlike traditional wars. There has been no official declaration of war between the two nations, yet military tensions, proxy battles, and strategic confrontations continue to unfold across the Middle East. Analysts often describe this situation as a shadow war, a conflict fought through indirect actions, regional allies, and limited military operations rather than large-scale invasions. Instead of massive armies confronting each other directly, the struggle plays out through missile strikes, drone attacks, cyber operations, economic sanctions, and military posturing. Several countries across the region have become the primary arenas where these tensions surface. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the waters of the Persian Gulf now sit at the center of one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical standoffs. Each incident, whether a rocket fired at a military base or a naval confrontation at sea, adds another layer of uncertainty to an already fragile regional balance. The danger lies not only in the attacks themselves, but in the possibility that a single miscalculation could quickly escalate into a much larger. One of the most important elements shaping the current situation is the extensive military presence maintained by the United States across the Middle East. Thousands of American troops remain stationed at military bases in countries such as Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. These bases serve as strategic hubs for surveillance operations, counterterrorism missions, and regional security coordination. Aircraft carriers frequently patrol the waters of the Persian Gulf, while advanced fighter jets and reconnaissance aircraft monitor activity across the region. Missile defense systems have also been deployed to protect American installations and allied nations from potential attacks. For the United States, maintaining this presence is seen as essential for safeguarding global energy routes, protecting allies, and deterring hostile actions from regional adversaries. However, this military footprint has also become one of the primary sources of tension with Iran. Iranian leaders frequently criticize the presence of foreign military forces near their borders, arguing that it represents a threat to their national security. Rather than confronting the United States through direct military battles, Iran has developed a strategy focused on regional influence and asymmetric warfare. Over the past 2 decades, Iran has cultivated alliances with various armed groups across the Middle East. These alliances allow Iran to project influence beyond its borders without engaging in conventional warfare with major powers. Groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen have played significant roles in regional conflicts. These groups operate independently but share political and strategic alignment with Tehran. Through this network of alliances, Iran has been able to expand its influence across several countries while maintaining a degree of separation from direct military confrontation with the United States. This approach allows Tehran to challenge American influence in the region while avoiding the enormous risks associated with a direct war between two powerful nations. One of the most strategically important regions in this confrontation is the narrow waterway known as the Strait of Hormuz. This channel connects the Persian Gulf to the open ocean and serves as one of the most critical energy corridors in the world. Nearly 1/5 of the global oil supply passes through this narrow stretch of water every day. Because of its importance to international energy markets, both Iran and the United States maintain a strong naval presence in the region. Iranian patrol boats, missile batteries, and coastal defenses operate along the northern shores of the strait, while American warships and allied naval forces regularly patrol the surrounding waters. Over the years, several incidents have occurred involving the seizure of oil tankers, naval standoffs, and confrontations between military vessels. Each of these encounters highlights the fragile balance that currently exists in the region. A single naval clash in this strategic waterway could disrupt global oil shipments and trigger economic shockwaves. Despite the intensity of these confrontations, Both the United States and Iran appear to be carefully avoiding actions that could trigger full-scale war. Leaders on both sides understand that a direct military conflict would likely have devastating consequences for the entire region. The Middle East contains some of the world's most important oil reserves and trade routes, and any major war could disrupt global energy markets, destabilize multiple governments, and create large humanitarian crises. For this reason, much of the current conflict remains confined to indirect confrontations and carefully calculated military responses. Yet the situation remains extremely fragile. Each missile test, each drone strike, and each naval confrontation carries the risk of escalation. The region now sits in a tense balance between deterrence and diplomacy, where even a small spark could ignite a much larger fire. As global powers watch closely, the question facing the world today is no longer whether tensions exist between the United States and Iran, but how long the delicate balance preventing a wider war